Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and in this video what we're going to be doing a intro to Django, like another one. I've done them in the past. It's been a while and I've kind of wanted a refresher, so I figured what better way to refresh it for myself than to teach. That's how I like to learn. I learn by showing. But first let's just talk about what is Django. So Django is in a category of what's called a batteries included web framework. So when it comes to building a web application, generally the smallest thing you need is just a basic server software. So this is like, so on the Python side, like that minimalist sort of basic uh, framework for just building out a web server would be something like a Flask or a Fast API. Essentially, what's going to let you do, and in JavaScript, it's like Express.js or Fastify or Koa. But they just let you do the very basics, which is write routes. So basically, you can start a web server, a piece of software that listens on a port, on a TCP/IP port, that responds to HTTP messages that are sent to that port. That's literally at the core of what it's doing. Okay, and you can do a lot with that. Okay, with whether Flask or Express, you can send back HTML, send back JSON data, whatnot. But then things get more complicated as you want to build more and more complicated apps. You have to create like different routes to handle submissions of forms and designing authentication, and then you have to then come up with like, hey, how am I going to connect to a database? And you have to look at the different database libraries and decide which one's the right one for you. There's a lot of choices you have to make. So a batteries included framework like Django or Masonite in Python, so those are like the cool ones, Django and Masonite in Python, and then in like JavaScript. JavaScript is a little bit more interesting because you have technically these front-end meta frameworks like Next, Nux, Remix that technically could be considered somewhat in that category, but then you have actually like more traditional batteries included frameworks like Nest.js and Fold.ts. And then in Ruby, of course, you have Ruby on Rails. There you have Sinatra as like the more minimalist framework, a la Flask or Express. Okay, so generally you can find both flavors in every language. Okay, but the idea is that the batteries included framework says, you know what, why do you need to make all those decisions? We're going to decide sort of like what we think are the best tools across all the things that exist, and then assemble them together sort of using what we think are the best practices. Okay, and there isn't like some canon of what's best practice. Like there are definitely like things that are more agreed upon than others, but you'll see like a lot of times like best practices can vary a lot from framework to framework, because especially these opinionated frameworks, because they are opinionated. This is a version of a group of developers of what they think the best way to build a web application is and the best sort of patterns to basically say, hey, you know what, since we already kind of know what are the best ways to do X, Y, and Z, they're already built in for you. You just have to fill in the stuff that we wouldn't know ahead of time. Okay, so that's what it is. So Django is going to be this framework that's just going to really speed up the process. Instead of you building everything from scratch, a lot of the things get built the same way every time. So all the boilerplate code is done for you using Django, and you just have to write the stuff that's sort of specific to your application. Heads up, generally I do think like learning to use one of these kind of frameworks becomes a lot easier if you learn one of those minimalist frameworks first and learn how to build all those things from scratch first, because then you can appreciate what a framework like Django, Ruby on Rails, Nest does for you, so that way you can use it more effectively. And that's how I would view these tools, being like, okay, hey, this allows me to take my foundational skills further versus what I think I see a lot of developers do, where they rush to learn these kind of frameworks, and it becomes like a crutch. And then what happens is that when they need to work outside of sort of like the boundaries of the framework, they're just kind of like throw their hands up. Don't do that. Okay, so if you're mainly a Python developer, then I would recommend going back and like learning something like Flask as well, and saying, hey, can I build the same thing in Flask, and how much more work would it be? Or if you know Express, build the same app in Express and then do it again in Django and see like, okay, see the differences. Okay, so now that we've introduced what Django is, what I'm going to do is we're going to just create a basic to-do app, and I'm going to just kind of walk through all the steps. Some of the steps I may have to look at the documentation for, because again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm probably rusty. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I got this new fresh folder here. Now, when you're working in Python, generally what you're going to want to do is isolate your dependencies so that way you can track the different dependencies for each project that you do. In JavaScript, you would do this with a package.json. In Ruby, you would do this with like a gem file. But in Python, the way you generally do this is you create a virtual environment and then using, and again, there's a couple different options in Python. You could be using pipenv, you could be using Poetry. I'm not going to assume that. I'm going to assume we're just using, all you got installed is Python. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to create a virtual environment that isolates those dependencies. Kind of like creating your own mini local version of Python. And generally the way you're going to do that is you're going to type in Python -m venv, because that's the virtual environment module built into Python, and then you're going to give it a name. So usually what you're going to see people do is they just call it venv again, meaning that's their virtual environment. Okay, and what that does, it creates this folder that you see just got created right over here. If you look inside of it, what it includes is essentially like your own version of Python. So you see it has like a pip, all that. Like it's separate than the Python that you've already installed globally on your system. Okay. And basically, if we want to use this version of Python, so the idea is that when we install libraries, I want to install to this virtual environment, not to my global environment. So I got to activate this environment, and that's done per terminal session. So again, I got to turn it on in this terminal by running that file. So I would write source, because it's going to help me run that file, because I'm saying, hey, I'm running the source code. And then I'm going to say that's, I have to give it this pass the source code's location, which is inside that virtual venv folder. In there's a folder called bin, which is short for binary. And the specific file that I want to run is called activate. And then you can tell that it worked because you should see this little addition to your prompt telling you that the environment is on. But again, if I create like a whole other terminal, so if I click here plus and add a new terminal, you'll see like this terminal does not have the virtual environment active. I'd have to do that command again. So the point of that is just like every time you run your terminal, you have to activate the Python virtual environment that you intend on working in. Okay. It could be a little tedious. That's why some people prefer things like pipenv and Poetry. But again, those aren't things that come out of the box with Python, so which is why I am not using them, to try to not introduce too many layers of stuff. Okay, but we've set up our virtual environment. So I have my own little environment where I can install stuff for Python. So if I take a look, if I do a pip list, see there's like nothing installed. Okay, just pip and setup tools. So what I want to do now is install Django. So I just do pip install Django, and that's going to install Django. Cool. Okay, Django is installed. Now I can double check by just doing a pip list, make sure it's installed. Okay, and I can see like, hey, look, there's Django, and then install a few other things. Okay, wonderful. So now what I want to do is create a new Django project. So then what I'll do is you do Django. I might have to look this piece up. I always forget if it's Django-admin or, yes, I think it's pretty sure it's Django-admin. And then what you do is you're going to do start project. So there's going to be two commands. Start project. Project is like a whole app. And then there's start app, which is a section, a unique feature of that project. Okay. Django does have its own terminology that can be different than a lot of other frameworks. Partly just because of like how old the framework it is. So like the terminology has changed a bit. So if you're using like Ruby on Rails or Next or Nux, you'll see like a lot of the terminology may be slightly different, or slightly muddled in the way that I would normally think they'd get used, like views. But here we go. So if I do this start project, and then I'm going to give it a name. So again, Django admin start project, and we'll just call this to do app. Okay. I think the issue is the dash. So let me get rid of the dash. Okay, and there you go. So you see it creates this new folder that's our new to do app. Okay. So I'm going to go cd into that folder, because you got to be in the folder to run the commands. Okay, cool. Now, just to show you basically what happens is that inside this project folder, you're going to have a starter app. Okay, so basically what happens is that all the subfolders in your Django project are generally known as apps, and we'll see how that kind of plays out in a second. But you always start off with sort of your main app, and the main app folder is the same name as your project. So I created a to do app project that results in the to do app folder. Okay, manage.py is just this file that's going to allow us to run all the commands we need to run when we need to run them. We'll learn them as we go. Okay, but if I go inside this to-do app folder, this is generally the setup you'll see for most apps. Just a couple things that are unique for the main project app is you're going to have these ASGI and WSGI files. Basically, in the future, you may want to deploy your app. And you can't just deploy a Python web application and have it scale and be sort of production ready. Generally, what you need to do is you're going to have to use some sort of like production grade server like GUnicorn, UVcorn, something like that. And essentially what those things do is they run it through something called either ASGI, the asynchronous server gateway interface, or WSGI, which is the web server gateway interface. And it just allows them to, like, you run the server with GUnicorn and UVicorn, and it just plugs into your application through these files. So you never need to edit these files. Okay, you can look at them, like, it's just like a line or two. But essentially, these are going to be for like deployment at a production scale. Okay, when you're developing it, no need to ever touch these files. So the only two files you really need to concern yourself with is settings and URLs. Okay, settings is going to be all your application settings. So if you wonder like, why does this folder work this way, or how does it know this? Chances are there's something in this file that tells your application that's how it works. Okay, so like everything, like just to kind of walk through this real quick, or not so quick. Okay, like where's the base directory? So how does it know like this is the base folder? Well, right here, it specifies what the base folder is. Okay, what the secret key is? Well, that's specified right there. So, why does like things like auth and all that work? Again, does it have to be the string? No. It just gives you an automatically like hash string. You can change it, whatever you want to do with it. Why do you get all these like cool debugging errors when you're working locally? It's because debug equals true. Generally, you're going to want that to be false when in production. Okay, things like handling like cores, that's going to be kind of handled there. Like basically, hey, which domains can like send requests to your application? How does it know how many apps? Like again, we're going to create these apps, these subfolders. How does it know which apps actually are part of your project? By the installed apps. You may have other middleware that adds functionality. That's not an app. It's not a separate feature, but it's something that's kind of like offering different types of global functionality to your app, aka middleware. Okay, and that's going to be inside here. Okay, this is how it knows which is sort of like the main. This root URL conf is like where are the main routes written. So that's what's saying, hey, like this file here, urls.py. You see, this is what's called like a python.path. So the idea is that to-do app is referring to this to-do app folder. .urls is referring to this file. Okay, so it's saying, hey, like in this file is where you'll find the default like routes. Okay, templates. How does it know where to look for templates when you render HTML pages? Well, that's all right here. And like, how does it know how it's rendering those templates? All sorts of cool stuff. See, these are all things you can change. Again, where is the WSGI stuff? Like, what is the database that you're using? Authentication stuff, internationalization, which is more like, okay, like times and dates and stuff. Where your static assets will be, and like, what is going to be your default primary ID field for your models. All that's going to be here in settings. You can add stuff. Like, basically, this is sort of the heart of how your particular project works. Okay, we're going to change little as possible, so that way you get used to the defaults in Django. Okay, but as you saw that like the default URLs place is here. Okay, so the URLs file, this is where you define routes. Okay, so again, in generally other framework, you know them as routes, where you say, hey, this URL path is going to point to this function. Okay, here they're called URLs. Okay, and generally instead of, a route pointing to what's called a controller function in most frameworks, the same terminology in Django would be a URL points to a view. Okay, so in this case, views are going to be the functions that return the result of going to a URL. Where like in a lot of other places, the controller kind of is the function that responds, and then the view would technically be the template you would render. That whole idea of a template is much more embedded here in Django, so that's why like the terminology gets a little muddier. Okay, as you can see here right off the bat, it already comes with like an admin panel. Okay, something we may explore a little bit later, but just so you know, like that's the one URL you have to begin with. Cool. So now you kind of see what files you have here. So it's not much to start out with. Now, what happens here, like if I want to start up my app, so we just want to see what the default app is. Now that we are in here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to do Python. Then you're going to run manage.py, because again, I told you that file is the one that's going to allow us to run all these Django commands. Python manage.py run server. Okay, now when I do that, okay, you're going to see this like little message here. We'll talk more about migrations in a little bit. So basically, right out of the bat, it gives you models, meaning like database models that to help you with admin, auth, lots of cool stuff right out of the gate. Like again, batteries included. Okay, but see, it says like the server is now running on port 8000. Okay, so now if I go to that URL, so I go to localhost 8000, we're gonna see the default page. Okay, cool. Okay, and again, you'll see this stuff. See it saying, "Hey, debug is true," and that's why it's showing you all this like sort of support help visuals. You know, if debug was false, it would just show you like an error because you know it doesn't think you're in development mode. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a to-do app. What we need is a to-do model. So generally what you're going to do is that anytime you think of a particular sort of chunk of functionality for your application or for your project, you want to create a separate app. This is one of the cool things about Django, because the idea is that if you take each functionality, like let's say, you create your own authentication, you make an auth app. So that way later on, if you work on another project, you could literally just grab that auth folder, plop it in another project, run your migrations, and ta-da, you didn't have to rebuild the whole thing. Okay, so like Django is really built with that kind of modularity in mind, and you can actually go online and like find pre-made Django apps. Like I remember once I was, building using this blog framework that existed at the time, and I think it was called like Mezzanine, and then I wanted to add podcasting to the project I was building, and I literally just downloaded this folder, I dropped it in my project, added it to my settings. So I just go into my settings and say, hey, add it to my installed apps, and then just ran my migrations, and ta-da, I had podcasting features. So there's something to that. I would say like that's probably one of the more unique and cool things about Django that you don't see in other frameworks. I don't think anyone other framework I've seen with sort of like that level of modularity in mind. I still want to put Django in my favorite framework just because of some of like the little like um, weird quirks it has. But over the years, those quirks have bothered me less, and a lot of the cool features of Django have impressed me more. Okay, so it's definitely has continued to grow on me. And they've definitely cleaned it up quite a bit. Okay, so let's see here. Moving forward, now let's create a app. So let's create an app so we can create our to-do functionality. So I'm going to shut off the server by hitting Control-C. Control-C always shuts off anything that's going on in the terminal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Django admin. So again, we're always going to use that Django admin command whenever we want to create a project or create an app. So we're going to say Django admin, create app, and I want to create an app called to-do. Okay. Oh, I think it's start app. Start app. There we go. Okay, and you see like it created this new folder to do. So now I have this new folder to do, and every time you create a new app, you're going to see this setup. Okay. So you're going to see a folder for migrations, because the idea is that you're going to define models, which are the different types of data that particular app is dealing with. And then you're going to need to create migrations to actually create the database tables that you need for that. Generally, you don't make the migrations. Django will do this for you, but that's what that folder is for. There's the inits.py, again, they're generally always going to be empty. They just tell Python that this folder is a module. It enables that whole like .path thing. So it's more of a Python thing. Admin.py, if you want to register a particular to-do app with the built-in admin panel that's in Python, I mean in Django, this is what this file's for. The apps.py file in any particular app is sort of like that core thing that ties the whole app together. That's what we're going to need to connect in order to, basically what we need to do is we need to pass this class to do config in this case inside that installed apps and settings. So that's what we're going to do right now. So essentially like the path would be to do dot apps dot to do config. So that's the path to this class, and that's what we're going to need to add in my settings.py. So I'm going to head back to the main folder, go to the settings.py, head to my installed apps to install this app, and we're going to say to do dot apps dot to do config. Okay, and that basically tells it, hey, like where can I find the thing to tell me all the information about that particular app. Okay, and then that's what this folder is going to do. Okay, it just kind of gives it the information. Now models, this is generally where you're going to want to write your models. Okay, tests is where you would want to write any kind of like unit testing. Not going to get into that this video. Views is where you'll write your views, essentially those functions that will connect to URLs. Okay, so essentially that's the lay of the land. Okay, so let's start off by first just creating a basic view, just so we can see how we can define the individual URL. Okay, so in this views.py, what you do is here you create the functions. Okay. And first, let's just create a file called index. So we'll say def index. Okay, I think these will always receive the request. So here's gonna be one of those situations where I want to go look at the documentation to refresh me. Okay, so let's go take a look at the documentation. Let's go to the views part. I just need to remember exactly what arguments it takes and what order. Forms, the template layer, the view layer. View functions. Okay, so yeah, it just takes the request. Okay, and we're going to be using render. I just want to make sure I use render correctly. Template response objects. Just show me a sample function. That's return. Not exactly what I'm looking for. I know I saw a version of this earlier in the forms. So let me go take a look at the forms. Yeah, okay, so yeah, you just return the result of render. Because essentially what's going to happen is that like the response to a particular URL is whatever this function returns. So that shows me that, okay, that's what I want to do. So let's go back there. And we're just going to return basically render index.html. Okay, real simple. So I'm basically defining a function. The function's name doesn't particularly matter, at least right now. And render, and then again, what that function renders is, and then again, this is just a request object. So if you need to figure out, hey, like what's the request method, what's the request body, that's where you will find it. Okay, and again, if you've used something like Express before, the request object in different frameworks is not always set up the same way. So read docs. Okay, but basically now this is going to refer to an index.html. It's like, where does this index.html come from? Well, the way to say, hey, where it's going to look by default, it's going to look inside your app for a folder called templates. So I got to create a folder called templates. And then that's where I would create my template. So in there, I'm going to create a new file called index.html. I think in the past you used to have to actually create another, I would have to create like another to-do folder in there. I don't think I have to do that anymore, but we'll find out in a second. So we're going to create h1. We did it. Okay, so we're going to see if this works. We did it. Okay, so now that I have a function, so I got this views function, this function is going to then, when a URL hits this function, it's going to send us that HTML file. So I now need to connect this function to a URL. I need to connect this view to a URL. So I have to go back to my urls.py. Okay, I'm going to import that function. So I'm going to say like from to-do.views import index. Okay, so I import that, and then I'm going to add just another deal here, and I'll just say path. Here you don't start with a slash. The slash is assumed. So in that case, I just write then We'll just write this in like first because it's going to be our first route just to kind of test out how this works. And it's going to be index. This is the function to run. So whenever I go to first or slash first, it's going to run the index function. So let me run the server so we can see that at play. And then if I go over here to slash first, okay, missing one required positional argument, template name. Okay, so first let me take a look at the docs. See that I write that wrong? Yes, I'm supposed to pass in the request first. Oops. So I need to go fix my view. So I'm going to go in here, pass in the request object first. My bad. Okay, and then let's try this again. Now I go back to over here, refresh the page. Works. Okay, so that's how you generate a page. Okay, and then we'll get more into like sort of like the templating and all that stuff in a moment. But that's the basic. That's a simple like how you generate a page from there. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to create a to-do app with like full CRUD to-dos. So what I want to do is create a model. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new class that's called to-do, and that class is inheriting from models.model. Okay, that's the base class. So basically all this functionality of how a model works is going to be automatically kind of inherited. So we don't have to really build all that stuff out. All we have to do is define the model. Okay, so essentially what we can do is we're just going to create a couple of different fields. So we're going to say subject, or we'll call it title. Title equals, and then we use these fields. And again, all this is in the documentation. Models.car field. Okay, and then we'll say something like max length equals 300. Okay, so that's one field. Okay, I'm just basically a text field that has a max characters of 300. Then we will do a details field. Models.car field, which is going to equal a max length, and we'll do 1,000 for that one. Cool. And that's literally all that's required. There's a lot more you can do with defining your models class, like defining relationships, defining all these sorts of metadata properties that'll just adjust how other parts of Django work with your model. But really all I care about right now is being able to make to-dos. Okay? So there's our model. Easy peasy. Now the thing is that our database needs to know that this model exists. So what I need to do, I know that my app is nice and wired because our route worked. That route wouldn't have worked if we hadn't successfully installed our app. You know, when we did the whole, added that into the installed app in settings. So I'm not worried about that. So what's going to happen is if I run this command, python manage.py, and we run make migrations, what that's going to do is it's going to scan all of our applications for that model file, that models.py, and look for classes that inherit from models.model and see has migrations already been made for that model, and whether there's been any changes to the model since the last time a migration's been made. Okay, so generally anytime you make a change to your model, you want to make migrations again, because it's the migrations that sync the database to what's going on in your code. So I run this, it's going to make some migrations. Oops, I need to undo that. There we go. So I'm going to run make migrations and see it created a migration. So if I go back to my migrations folder, there's this 0, 1 initial migration. And if you look in here, it's a bunch of code to generate the tables in your database. You do not need to write this, okay? That's one of the nice things about Django. It's going to set this up for you. But the idea is that every time you make a change to what tables you need, basically you change your models, you make migrations so that way it writes this code for you, and then you can run this code by running python manage.py migrate. And this will always make sure that the database is in sync with what your app is. Never delete a migration unless you know what you're doing. Because generally the idea is that all the migrations you create will reproduce the structure of your database as it was. So I could delete my database. Okay, like right now, I'm using the default database, which is SQLite. So the minute I ran that migration, it created this database right here, db.sqlite3. Okay, I could delete that and then run my migrations again, and I'd end up with the same exact database I had before as far as like the structure of the tables. So that's the beauty of migrations. It allows you, that way I don't have to keep doing all that work every time. So once I deploy this app, I can just migrate to my production, run migrations on my production database, and my database will be ready to go. I won't have to like construct every table, hammer and chisel, okay, with like a bunch of SQL statements and stuff. So that is what's going on there. So again, basically anytime I make a change to a model, I want to make migrations, and then I want to run those migrations. Okay, cool. So now I can make to-dos. So now generally what I want to do is I would like to, uh, I'm going to try to make a sample to-do. So let's see if I remember how this works. It's Python manage.py. What is it, like db console? Or I think maybe just console. Yeah. Let's check the docs for the CLI commands. CLI. Admin sign, exceptions, the basics. Actually, let's just do it. Control F, CLI. No. Okay, so let's just do this. Python console command, Python Django. Well, we could also do this another way. If I remember right, I could also do Python manage.py and do db console. Nope, that was wrong too. Okay, Python Django CLI commands. Here we go. That's what I'm looking for. Django admin help. Oh, okay, so that's where we can get the help. I just want to learn how to do the thing. Here we go, db shell. Okay, for the database shell. How about just for the, is it just shell for the normal one? It's probably just going to be shell. URS, so probably we can write up. Shell, yep, it's shell. Okay, cool. Okay, so basically it would be Python manage.py shell. What this does is it's going to run the Python REPL in the context of your application. So now if I just want to like create some sample to-dos just to kind of get started without having to build out the whole app, I can do it from here. So now I can just import my to-dos. So I can like import to-do dot, it would be import to-do dot models dot to-do dot models dot to-do. No module to-do dot models dot to-do is not a package. Did I spell it wrong? To-do. Maybe it wants me to include like to-do app dot to-do dot models. Port. Okay, so let's try this from to-do dot models import to-do. Let me do that. That looked like it worked. Okay, and just to double check, we'll do print to-do. Good. Okay, so we got our to-do. So if I want to create a to-do, we'll just say const, oh, I mean not const, not JavaScript. To-do equals a new to-do, and again there was two fields. So there was subject, which is going to equal, you know, breakfast, and then there was the details, which will equal eat breakfast. Okay. Subject. Oh no, yeah, because I called it title. That's right. Title. There we go. And then what we want to do is save the to-do to the database. So we do to-do.save. Okay, and that should be good to go. Then we're going to do this again with lunch. And then we're going to do it again and then eat lunch. Okay, and then we're going to take that to do and save it. Okay, and now that that's saved, we want to just double check that are we getting all the to-dos. So I'm going to make a variable called to-dos, which is going to equal to-do dot objects, which is, that's weird. You're like, wait, what is this objects property is this thing called the object manager. All like your functions for doing like SQL like stuff are going to be methods built into this objects. So it's to-do dot objects dot oh, there we go. Good. There's a list of all the things. I think it was a dot all now. Here you can see like all the functions that are built into this object. I want filter first get like a get all. There it is all. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. So you can see there's like a lot of different functions. You won't memorize all of them, but there's a few that you'll use a lot. To-do.objects.all. So that should return me all the to-dos. So now if I print to-dos, okay, so you see it's a query set object of to-do objects. And see there's two to-do objects in that query set. So the two to-dos I made are in the database. So that's just to kind of seed some data. So once I'm done with that, I can get out of here. So I can just type in exit. And then we're out of there. Cool. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to create the main page that actually shows these to-dos. So let's go back to our views. And we're going to take that index page and we're going to make that a little bit more interesting. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to import from models. So like from dot models import to do. Now notice I said dot models, so that's assuming I'm in the same folder. So since this views is in the same folder as models.py, I can just do dot models import to do. So now I have the to do models in there, and I can go get those to dos. So I will go get those to dos in the same way you just saw me do it a second ago. To do dot objects dot all. Okay, awesome. So that's going to give me all the to dos. And now what I can do is I can send those to-dos, because there's a third argument here. I can pass in the to-dos as a dictionary. And I can pass all the to-dos. Okay, so now what's going to happen is that when we write in the HTML file, I'll actually be able to pull from that array of to-dos in there. Okay, so now I can go back and edit this HTML file. So I'm going to go back to my templates. And we're going to be able to use what's called Jinja in here. Jinja is a cool, what's called templating language that allows us to kind of inject some code into our templates. So I'm just going to write h1 my to-dos. We're going to do a ul here. And then what I want to do is the way we write Jinja, I'm going to write like two curly brackets. It would be like if, actually it would be for to do in to-dos. And let me just double check the syntax. Jinja syntax. Okay, yeah, for item in navigation, and then we just do the end for at the end of the thing, and then again we inject things with double curly brackets. So actually I need to make sure we use percentage signs there. So let's head back over here. Let me just change that to a percentage sign, and this to a percentage sign. And let me just put the end of the loop. End for. Okay, good. Okay, so essentially what it's going to do is going to repeat whatever I put in between for each to do. So for each one, I'm going to want an li that just basically lists the to do dot title. Okay, and that's it. That's all for now. Let's see here if I go back over here. Like, is my server running? Nope. So let me just get that running. Oops, that's the shell. Okay, run server. And let's go back to here. And see, it lists the two to-dos we've made so far. Although I don't want this to be at slash first, I'm going to want this to be like slash to do. So I'm going to go update my URLs. Okay. This is going to be slash to do. Okay. Good. And then so now I have to just, now I can go to do slash, and there's that page. And we can begin building out sort of like our other possible views. Now the other thing I'm probably going to want to do is basically create a form to create a to-do. We'll just do that on that same page. Now a nice thing that you can do in Django is you can create forms. Okay, so let's just see here. Let's create a file to generate our form classes. So new file, I'll just make it like a forms.py. Okay, and let's just go back to the documentation. Let's go to the form section. Okay. Want to go over overview. Okay, scroll down. Here we go. So see, we're going to import this forms class, and then literally we make a form like you would make a model. And this is going to basically generate all the HTML for the form for you, so you don't actually have to write it yourself. Now, we already have a model, so there's no need for us to keep defining all these car fields. So there's also a special form called a model form. So let me go find a version of that. So Control F, working with templates. Control F, model. Here we go. Forms.model form. Okay, so we're going to import that. And then essentially we just give it the name of the model and the fields that we want to actually generate inputs for. Okay. So let's do that. Okay. So here we're going to do is I'm going to first import my model. So I'm going to import from .models. Well, actually, it's from .models, import to do from Django.forms, import model form. Okay, and then we're going to say class to do form. Okay, which is borrowing from model form or inheriting from model form. Okay, and then we're going to say the model equals to do. And let me just take a look at that copy. So model equals that, and then the fields equal, and then we just choose the fields, which are going to be title and details. Okay, ta-da! Okay, so that's going to automatically generate like that HTML for a form in the different ways I'm probably going to want that information. Okay, so now I can go over here and I'm going to use that form. So we'll say from .forms import to do form. Okay, we can generate the form like this. So you see form article form, that's just going to return the thing that's going to generate that HTML. Okay, cool. So then we're going to say form equals to do form. Awesome. And then we can send that form down here. So we'll just say form equals form. We send that down to our template. Nice. Now I just go back to our index file. Templates, index, and now I can just add a form. So I'll add a form tag. And the action is going to equal slash to do. Let me just make sure that's the same thing I have here. Yes, slash to do. Except now the method is going to equal post. Okay, so there's my form tag, and then I can just interject the form in there. Okay, and then that's it. Now I have a form created. So now if I go over here, I refresh the page. Okay, model form has no model class specified. Did I not specify a model? Let's go to our forms. Model. Did I not? go back over here. Article form. Oh, I see. We're supposed to do that in the meta class. My bad. Basically, what you do is you do a subclass inside of it. And then let me see that. Yeah, that was class meta. That's where you do all this like kind of metadata stuff. And then that should fix it. Okay. So now let's restart the server. Let's just refresh the page, see if that fixed it. And there you go. So you see a form was just automatically generated. Okay, like I didn't have to do all that. But right now, it's going to make a post request to that same URL. So right now, I need to make sure that when this happens, that it happens for the right. So what I want to do is make this a little bit more complicated because I don't always necessarily want to render this. Okay. So now we're going to have to create like an if statement. So like if request dot method, actually that should be in parentheses. So if request dot method equals post, then we're going to want one thing to happen. Okay, and that's where we're going to create a new to do. Okay, so essentially what would happen here is we're going to get the data from the post. So if I actually refer to an example of that, because there is one here in the forms. Now right here, we'll go back and forth. I do kind of want this for reference for later, but what I want to do is show an example of the route. It should be right here. So you see here, like if request method equals post, then here's we're getting like the data from the form. Okay, because so you're passing in the request, this request.post, which is going to be the body of the request. Okay, and then you can like do stuff with the data. Okay, now in this case, and then else, again, they're just going to return the page. Okay, so let's see here. And then I wonder if this, yeah, redirect, that's what I want. Okay, so we're also going to want to return that. Okay, so let me get that from, what was that there? Django shortcuts, Django HTTP. Django HTTP. Import HTTP redirect. Okay. So essentially what's going to happen here is we're going to go get the form. And the form is going to equal response.redirect. Not response.redirect. Response.post. Okay. You're right, not response. Request. Okay, and again, I'm going to just create this other if for like get request. So if request.method equals get, which is should be the default, then these things will happen. Okay, so that way I can just say, hey, like whenever this URL is used, different things happen depending on whether the request was a post request, get request, put request, whatever. Okay. And now here I can then, let's just for now, let's just console.log, well, not console.log, print form, so we can kind of see what we got. I want to print form. Then I also want to print form dot, we'll say form dot details. Forget if it's a dictionary. Actually, let's just first print form. See what that is first. Okay. And let's go back over here. Oh, and actually make sure I put the redirect. HTTP response redirect, and we're going to just redirect back to slash to do. Slash. Okay. And I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to say cheese, cheese. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, let's see if it pick up on that. Okay, I think that form's going to need a submit button. So let's add that. Button, submit. Okay, refresh. Cheese, cheese, submit. You call this URL via a post, but the URL doesn't end in slash, and you have append slash set. Ah, I need to add the slash here. That's what it doesn't like. Because that's another thing to worry about with Django. It's very particular about those trailing slashes. There are ways where you can make it a little less sensitive about it, but out of the box, it's very sensitive about it, which is probably my biggest pet peeve. Okay, cheese, cheese. CSRF application failed. Okay, so it wants the CSRF token. Okay, basically what the CSRF token is, the idea is that it's going to prevent like robotic and spamming like form submissions. What it'll do is it'll request this token that's on the page. What I'm going to do, like, I'm just going to turn off the CSRF feature. The way you do that for now is you would go to settings, settings.py, and the CSRF middleware, they're just going to comment that out. Okay, and that'll turn that off. So now if I go back here, I refresh the page. I hit cheese, cheese. Okay, query take is not callable. Which line did that? Form request.post. Oh wait, let's see here. Go back to the reference thing here. Okay. Oh. So we gotta read those samples a little bit more carefully. So if I go back to views here, this actually should be to do form, and then we pass in request.post. There we go. So let's try that again. And again, I always like to leave like all the troubleshooting in the video because you're gonna probably run into these issues here and there, and watching how I deal with them I think is of value. And plus it's less editing, right? Jeez. There we go. To do views on index and it return HTTP response index. If it returned none instead. Why did it return none? Oh, I didn't write the word return. Okay, there we go. Go do that again. Refresh. Cheese, cheese. Okay, good. That time it worked. So now let me take a look over here. I can take a look for that print. That's going to be all the way towards the bottom. Okay, and you see the form is, that form object is essentially HTML, which we know. Okay. Now, again, that post is a dictionary, so I wonder if I do this. Print request.form or request.post.get, and then I say, hey, I want to get title. Does that give me what I think it's going to get me? Okay. Cheese, cheese. Okay, so let's scroll down here. And yes, that works. Okay, so that's what I really want at the end of the day. Okay, so I don't really need this because I'm just generating the form. So I don't need to generate this form here, really. All I really need to do is create a new to-do. Okay, so we're just going to do to-do.objects.create, and then we pass in the arguments like title, which is going to equal request.post.get title. Okay, and just to make this a little bit neater, we'll just do this across multiple lines. Okay, and I guess I could have just unpacked it, but and then details equals request.post.get details. Okay, so wonderful. Okay, so now when I go back over here, now I can just add like dinner, eat dinner, and see dinner's been added. Because again, before I had to like create it and then save it, because I wasn't doing this create method. The create method is like basically doing both of those things at the same time. It'll create a new instance of a to-do object and then immediately save it, but you do it all in one function, so it's just a nicer way of doing it. Okay, cool. So now we've made it where essentially I can now see and create. So now what if we want to do like update, delete, and all that stuff? We can do that simple enough. Um, you could do, there's a couple different ways we could do this. We could create probably the simplest thing we can do is just create for a delete button at least, we could do like a def destroy view, which is going to receive the request. Okay, and it's going to receive the request, and it's going to also receive the ID. Okay, and you'll see how we receive that ID in a moment. Okay, but what's going to happen is I'm going to want to do dot objects dot, and I want to delete, and then I should just pass the ID. Okay, that should delete it, and then I'm just going to redirect them back to the main page again. Okay, and again, this should be done if, well, it doesn't really matter. It's only going to be used for, I'm only going to have a button that clicks there. Okay, but we just need to connect this view now to a URL. So then what I'll do is I'll create another thing here, and we'll call it path to do / delete / int ID. And this is what's called the URL param. So like Express, it's like colon ID. Here you do it with the angle brackets. But the cool thing is you can pass a type. So you can do like int, str for string. And basically, instead of just always getting a string back from your params, I can say, hey, this is meant to be a number. So parse it into an integer for me. Cool. Okay, so that will, and then again, I got to make sure I include that trailing slash. Okay, so that'll do that. So now if we just go back to that index template, I can just say for each of these, I can add for each of these LIs, each of them also get a form, whose action is going to post to /to do / delete / and then we'll use the curly brackets to inject the to do .id. Okay, and method post, because forms can only post or get. And then we just put a button for delete. There we go, and that should basically allow us to delete. So now if I refresh this page, well, good. Positional argument view. Where they complain, line 23 in urls.py. Line 23 path. Oh, I never gave it the function. So I also wanted to import destroy from there and say, hey, run destroy. Okay, so I refresh. See, now everything has a delete button. So if I delete dinner, I get an error. So let's go back. Models, views, x.delete. So it's saying there is no method.delete. Okay, so let's take a look. It's probably going to end up being destroy. I bet your bottom dollar it's destroy. Okay, so let's try that first, and then we'll consult the documentation. Okay, refresh. Nope. Okay, objects, manager, methods, Django, because again, this is a refresher for me as well. Okay, so we can take, there should be like a list of all the methods. I don't think it's in this section actually, I think it's going to be in this one. Okay, retrieving all objects, expressing, escaping, query, deleting objects. Here we go. So it's just going to be, oh, the object dot delete. So it wants me to go get the object. So I have to get the object first, and then I can call a delete method on the object itself. So essentially what it wants me to do is do get, okay, so it'd be pk equals id, and then I would just do a dot delete off of that. Okay, that should do what I wanted to do. Let's go back, refresh, delete dinner, and dinner's deleted. So now I can add and delete. So you can kind of see how this goes. Now I can just keep making other pages, using other URL params, generating forms, and then later on, if I wanted to do like an update form that's pre-populated, let me go back to the form. Oh, no, actually, I think this is right there. Like if I wanted to do a form that's pre-populated now, what I could do is I could go grab the individual article and then generate the form by passing that individual, in this case for us would be the to-do, I'd pass the individual to-do to the article, the form creator, and it'll create the form with all the fields already filled in. So that way we don't have to. That saves us time. That makes it just really much easier to generate the form, and that's kind of what Django's going for. Like once you kind of learn all the nuances, there's a lot of nuances. The idea is that a lot of the HTML you'd be writing, a lot of the like complex logic would just be pretty quick to set up. So hopefully this gave you a good idea of how Django works when you're using templating. I have done plenty of videos where I've done like the Django API and we've consumed it in React and things like that. But I haven't done too much with like Django templating and like the Django form features and a lot of this other stuff that's going on in Django. So hopefully this video kind of gives you a flavor for all of that. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Have a great day. Leave a like, a comment, and have a great day and enjoy.